rainforest. That was his attention span.
So now your exhibit's in the Krindler Gallery.
Yeah, it's very fitting. Who's this guy?
I don't know. You haven't really changed too much since then, Jim.
As I told you, I have no idea when this picture was ever taken. Neither does Lynn. But that's me. Okay.
Now, what's this here, Jim?
This is on the North Fork. And that's Jim Mountain, which is right outside our window. In the real estate guide, they always show Jim Mountain in the background with snow on it so they could sell the property. But this was a cattle drive up the North Fork, and I knew the cowboys, and so I got in my car and I kept getting ahead of them and taking pictures. This one happened to work out well.
Who is it? You don't remember who those folks are? Or?
Well, one of the cowboys, believe it or not, was named Gary Cooper. And
I think you remember you saying that.
I think that's him. Yeah. And then
You're Bob.
We went out to Meeteetse, and there was an archaeological cave there that Bob wanted to show me, outside of Meeteetse, and that's when I took these pictures. Bob was extremely photogenic, and I painted him 6 times. And he was my best friend for years. We went all over. He showed us a buffalo jump and all kinds of things. He took us all over. He took us to Crow Fair the first time.
You probably knew this country about as well as anybody.
Yeah. It's hard to believe he's dead. I painted him 6 times. This is Dick Curtis. He and his brother Ralph they still have the ranch. He's 96 now. I used to go out to the Brandies every year.
And he's still alive.
Yeah, I know. I saw him at the eye doctor last year, and he, bow-legged cowboy. But they were very nice to me. I went out every year, and they made desserts and the best whipped cream I've ever had. A whole tub of whipped cream after the brandings.
Whoa.
That's what I remember.
I could use that.
And this is just something I took out at Old Trail Town. I just thought it looked very pretty.
That's probably one of your rare photographs that doesn't have a person in it.
Yeah. Well, I'd use it for backgrounds.
Oh, okay.
And I just took that because I thought it was a beautiful picture.
Yeah, I guess a lot of your pictures you used.
And this is Charlie Webster, and I think it's an interesting story. I saw his picture in the Cody paper. I had no idea who he was. The Webster Ranch is in Meeteetse, and it's been in the family for years. I don't know how many generations. And he had the squarest jaw. Ed Webster had done some legal work for me, and they were cousins. So he arranged me to go out there, and we became good friends. And I used to go to all the brandings and shearings out there, and I'd give them pictures, and he posed for me, and I did a painting of him without the background. His whole family came to see it in Cody.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I gave him a color sketch. And now I've run into him 2 or 3 times. He's 86. He was a big, rugged guy, and he either had a stroke or heart attack. The doctors weren't sure what he had. Now he's bent over, he uses a cane. But I saw him at the library a few weeks ago. He still has big, strong hands. Boy, is he strong. But they were very nice to me, and we became very good friends.
I guess probably Brian Webster is one of his relatives. Yeah.
Who's he?
I think he does real estate now, but I think he said he went down to the ranch down there on Meeteetse. So I mean, obviously it's
probably a relative. Mm-hmm. And this is Louis Charlie. Another, I think, interesting story. I would always scout the July 4th parade looking for models because they were all bunched up before the parade began. And these Indians were on a platform on a float, and some guy had this idea of setting up pre-Columbian Indian villages as a tourist thing and to charge admission. And Louis Charlie and these two other girls, Millie Cody and Mavis Smith, and they all posed for me. They were staying out on the West Strip. They camped out there, and I went out to photograph them. And one was wearing hip huggers, and she was dancing to the music of the group Chicago. When they got dressed up in their period costumes, I did I did two paintings of him and one each of the girls. And this was his little boy, Christopher. He was so cute.
Did you do a painting similar to that photograph, or?
Yes, I did a painting, and the president of the print gallery happened to be out visiting me, and he said, "That's a print." And they did the print, and it didn't do well because people didn't know whether it was a boy or a girl. It was a boy. Was he cute? And that's the story on that. I went to art school in 1947 in Cape Cod, in Provincetown. Studied with a guy named Henry Henchy. Well, Jesse and Polly Frost were fellow students. They were from Chicago and I was from New York. They were a few years older than me. And then that was it. And then we came to Cody as dudes in 1966. And Bob Myers thought it would be nice to have some artists come while we were there. And who's there but Polly and Jesse Frost? We hadn't seen each other for 19 years. And this was 1966 and 1947. And we renewed our friendship, and Mac, of course, was their son. He was 16 years old when we moved here, and now we're good friends, and Polly and Jess passed away. But they were two of the nicest people. Well, anyway, I went to his taxidermy shop when we first moved out here, and that's where we renewed our acquaintance.
So that's Mac's father.
That's right.
Oh, I didn't
Jesse
realize
Frost,
that.
the nicest man.
And you actually went to art school at Cape Cod.
Yes.
With Mac's father
And mother.
and mother.
Yeah, they're both artists.
Oh, that's
It's a small world. Who would know we'd meet again in Cody, Wyoming?
But they had come out from Cody to go to art school, or were
Yeah,
they?
well, they were in Chicago at the time.
Oh, okay.
They were in art school in Chicago. But he's from Cody. I think she was from Chicago or someplace. But Jess has a historic family background.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the Frost family's an old
yeah, right.
family. So he went to Chicago to art school, and then on to Cape Cod, and that's where you met.
Yeah, that was on Cape Cod, the art school in Cape Cod.
Huh. So that's a.
And this is a fun thing. They had a recreation of the Buffalo Bill Wild West show in 1983, and they got the oldest Indian and white man survivors of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. They were both 95 years old. His name is Ben Marrowbone. His last name is Webb. I forget his first name. I have it written down at home. And they
I think it's Harry Webb. It says over there on the on the plaque. It says Harry
It
Webb.
may be the wrong name, but was his last name. And they both did a little dance, and I wound up photographing Ben Marrowbone and painting him. But they're the oldest living survivors of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
Amazing, and you were able to capture that.
Oh yeah. Well, I knew the director of the Buffalo Bill Museum, and he gave me a pass. I had free entree down on the field, so I went to all the dress rehearsals and all the performances. But I was right down there where I could photograph people. And here's another picture. He looked pretty good. He had beautiful skin and a square jaw. I hope I look that good when I'm 95.
And he was 95 at the time.
95 years old. Well, this is Roy Bozzona, born the same day Wyoming became a state, July 10th, 1890, and he always said, "Call me Old Man Wyoming," which he was. And I did a painting of him. It took me 3.5 months, and it's now in the Smithsonian Institute. But he used to just sit in his saddle shop and watch people come by. And I knew John Thevener, who owned the saddle shop, so I got to meet Roy. He was like family. Once we invited him up for lunch, he showed up at 8:30 in the morning. But he was a very basically intelligent man with a tremendous knowledge of the area. And it was like family.
You know, I think Mary, they were submitting something about, you know, significant, something significant from the archives, and they submitted these photographs.
That's what she told me.
It says he was born on the day that Wyoming became a state.
July 10th, 1890.
Yeah. So these were what they submitted, actually.
Yeah, she told him, and he should be there. And here he is in the winter. A great-looking guy. Wonderful profile. He took us all over the area and showed us things from way back. He helped build the road to Yellowstone Park and things like that. And this is Nina Bigback, and her husband was John Bigback. I painted both of them. I knew someone whose daughter, Dean Beamer's niece, Spike Beamer was his brother, and his daughter married the son of the tribal council chief up in Lame Deer of the Northern Cheyennes. And so I went up there to photograph a lot of people. I arranged it. I paid them each, I think, $50. And this is Nina Bigback, who I painted and is in my book in 1994. It was very exciting going up there. You come there and you're Whitey or Custer. These people don't know you. I'm sure they hate you. You don't have to tell them what to do. And I think I paid them each $50 to pose for me. Great names: Grover Wolfvoice and Wesley Whiteman and Bigback. The names are great. And Mary Whitehorse, and great names.
Great subjects for your for your photography and paintings.
They used to have the Frontier Festival every year in June, right in front of the museum. I don't think they have it anymore. And I used to go, and this was a trick shooter putting on a demonstration for the audience. And I never got his name. I don't know who he is. And this is Butch Lemke, L-E-M-P-K-E. He was a science teacher in the winter, and he was the rodeo clown here for several years, and I got to know him pretty well. He was a really nice guy. And this is one of the gals in the night rodeo. She had a trained horse, and
was she like a trick rider or something?
Yeah,
or
she was a trick rider, and I don't remember her name. I don't know if it's.
I think it's Angie Schneider. It says.
That's it, Angie Schneider. That's her. And I would photograph her before the rodeo. I get there early. I think I took these pictures before the rodeo. And she was in the Wild West show in 1983 too. And this is Harley Kincaid, who was the sheriff of Park County, who had a great sense of humor. He told me he never fired his gun all the years he was sheriff, which I believe was over 20 years, and he had the biggest hands. And we had lunch with him once at the Irma. It was Meatloaf Day, and he didn't finish, and he put it neatly in a napkin. I said, "Is that for your dog?" He said, "It's for Martha, his wife, who's now 102. And I ran into Jerry Kincaid, his son, who is a real born wise guy, who I've known for years. His son is named Jerry Kincaid, and he's now 72. I just saw him Tuesday at the dentist.
Okay, yeah.
And he has big hands like his father. He took his ring off, and he had Dr. Walton, the dentist, and me try and put it on. It was loose even on our thumb. He had a big hand. When I was taking pictures at Old Trail Town of some models, right on the backside of Bob Edgar's cabin, I painted Martha and I painted Harley. Both. A wonderful people.
Yeah, because I think Jerry's wife used to work with the library or something. I
didn't know his wife.
Or she was, I think, or maybe in Mary's writing group or something.
And I painted him driving a wagon down Old Trail Town.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's
And this was up near Two Dot Ranch. Scott McKinley, the foreman, was one of my best friends, and he arranged his cattle drive up in the hills. So, and we had a chuck wagon, which I believe in the picture.
Yeah.
And we had dinner at the chuck wagon, and he simulated this whole thing for me.
So he just did that just for you to be able to to photograph it.
Right, right. And this is Jay Eckwall. I had a minor operation. Actually, it wasn't even an operation. I had to stay overnight at the hospital. And the guy in the bed next to me was about 6'3", and his feet were hanging off from the bottom of the bed. And he was the cowboy from Two Dot Ranch, and he fell off his horse rounding up cows. So we became friends, and he invited me up to Two Dot Ranch, which is how I got involved with the ranch, and did a lot of things with the ranch, brandings and all kinds of stuff. And anyway, that's Jay Eckwall, and he had a son who was 14, who was 6 feet already. He was a nice.
He looked like a tall, lanky
He
cowboy.
was. When I took these pictures, his foot was still in a cast.
Really?
Yeah. And here he is again. Look at the guy.
Yeah, you had the opportunity to really see some folks that probably just those kind of folks aren't around anymore.
No. And I had a reason to do it. I wanted to photograph people to paint. So I was all over the place.
But no one else ever, I mean, you hadn't have done this, that just wouldn't have been captured. I mean, these
No.
things would not have been captured.
And I used to go to the rodeo on the 3rd and 4th, any daytime rodeo, and whenever I saw anyone that looked photogenic, I'd ask him to pose for me in front of this white background. I have no idea who this guy was.
Yeah, there's not a name on the,
No.
it just says bronc rider there on
He
the,
just posed to me, and is that a cast on his hand?
I think it's just where they tape up their arm, you probably was, like I said, a bareback rider.
Yeah,
And,
hold on. But I have no idea who he is.
all right, there you go.
This is Bob Myers. He and I started working together as illustrators in the best art studio in the country in 1950. And he always liked to come out here. He had 2 young children, and they would stay on a guest ranch, the Siggins Ranch, out on the South Fork. And they finally bought a ranch out here, 36 miles out on the South Fork. And we kept in touch. He would always send me some sagebrush or something. And we finally came out here as dudes in 1966. And Bob was a tough guy. He was a brown belt in judo. He knew how to box, and he had a horrible temper. But Bob, you can see, was a tough guy. And he fired his gun at a lot of people, not to shoot them, just over their head, if they trespassed, and he was murdered in cold blood. He was packing a pistol, had a rifle in the truck, and I tell that to people. They always think they're safe with a gun. I said, if someone wants to kill you, they're going to kill you, whether they have a gun or not.
And that was supposedly Ansonetti.
Well, I'm sure it was Ansonetti, because I followed the confrontation for 2.5 years when I lived up there. Every hunting season, Anson belonged to the Eagles, and all the members would come and stay at his place. And to get to his place, you had to go diagonally through Bob's yard, right by his cabin, our cabin. So one thing led to another. He even put a chain and a lock on the front gate, and they cut it off, and there were confrontations. And Anson used to go out every Saturday for his mail. I used to go 6 days a week. It was a 1-mile walk both ways, and he always carried his gun to shoot rabbits to eat. And that was on a Saturday, and they'd been feuding, and so I'm sure he killed Bob.
And you were living there at Bob Myers' place when that happened.
I was a
You and Lynn.
pre-trial witness for the prosecution and the defense, and I had to take a lie detector test. I was a witness at the trial. Yeah, it was a big thing. The court stenographer said it was the biggest case. He was my age that he'd ever, witnessed in the court in Cody.
Gary Troxel went up over in the thoroughfare with Ansonetti and spent a month one spring.
Who did?
Gary Troxel. He's Jeff Troxel's father.
Oh, I know him real well. He's still a good-looking man.
I'm sorry?
He's a good-looking man.
Yeah.
I see him in Albertsons.
Yeah, and when he was just a teenager, I believe, he and he went with Ansonetti over to the thoroughfare. They walked and trapped for like a month.
Oh, Anson was in great shape. He didn't have a car. His neighbor, Jack Brown, who I've also painted, used to drive him to town. He didn't have a car. And this is Brian Pettit, who was a cowboy at Rimrock Ranch in the summer. Gary Fales was my model agent. Every time there was a good-looking cowboy, he'd call me up and I'd photograph. And this is Brian Pettit. He was very photogenic. I had no idea what happened to him. He was in his early 20s. He and another guy, Jeff Brzezinski, who also worked at Rimrock Ranch, I guess they stayed there all year round, and they came in person in the winter. And we were all down for taking pictures.
And that was 1985 when that.
Is that when I took these?
When that photograph was taken. You can tell some of these are just the type of sunglasses that everybody wore then.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it looks. Actually, I think some of those are kind of coming back.
Yeah. And this. This was at the rodeo. They had a picture of the Cody Enterprise. They had a star attraction every July 3rd and 4th rodeo. And this guy had these two trained bulls, and his wife, Vicki Adams, who was runner-up Miss Indian America. She was 35 when I took their pictures. And I arranged to pay them and photograph them about an hour before the rodeo started, right behind the stands. And he had the strongest hands. He said, we have a great life. He said, we get paid to play cowboys and Indians. He and his wife.
So did his wife dress up kind of like an Indian?
Yeah, she had a headdress on.
Okay. And then down below that is actually the sketch that you made before you painted it, or it's a pencil sketch there.
Yeah. Of him?
Yeah, basically of that photograph.
I never painted him. He wasn't as good looking as his wife. And this is a sheep herder, a Navajo sheep herder. Allie Britta had a ranch up in Sunlight, but she used to graze her cattle. This is below Hart Mountain, closer to Cody in the winter. And she called me up to say she had this Navajo sheep herder. And I went out there and photographed him and paid him $25. And she had told me he wore a headband, and I forgot. So I went back the next day and paid him another $25. He called me a crazy white man for paying money. But I've done two paintings of him. There's an Navajo Indian. And here's a photograph of him. You can see why I photographed him.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell he's been out in the weather, and then that's the. Let me see how that gets a reflection of that.
Great looking guy.
And that looks like those were taken in 1973.
These?
These one of the sheep herder, but no, these.
1973?
Yeah, that's what it says there.
That's 32 years ago.
Now this is the background for that one famous of the famous painting you have.
The contemporary soup. This was up in Billings. We were having lunch at the Dude Rancher, and right across the street was a public school, a high school. It was a school, and they had this peeling wall that said "No parking, violators towed away." And I thought that would be a great symbolic background for a contemporary Indian. You don't really want it here, so you stay on the reservation. So I used that as a background, and that's the painting the museum bought for their collection. And this is just another background. I went all around photographing peeling walls and old walls, all over. Every town we went to, look for things like this.
So you had an idea that, kind of in your head, that these would be a good background for one of your paintings.
Yeah, when I did cowboys, I'd usually use a Western background, a corral or a ranch-themed background. But when I did contemporary Indians, I used peeling walls and things like that, so that it looked like they were, not on the reservation. That's corny, because they were off the reservation, and a lot of them. They had a soccer tournament in Denver years ago, I think 1980, and a friend of mine who was an artist in Denver told me about it, and I went there, and he arranged for 13 Indians to pose for me. It was like a, line.
I just line up there for.
Yeah, and I spent 2 days photographing them. I've done a lot of paintings in that segment.
And I think these are what do you call these small
Just color
images
sketches.
that you call them?
Color sketches, trying to figure out what kind of a background to put behind them. One of these was taken up in Deaver or Franny. It was just an old building. And this is the one that I used that was from Billings.
So for all of your paintings, you'd make a sketch and then make a small image just for the color, to try to get the color right.
Yeah, a pencil drawing, and then for proportions and spacing, the model, and the color sketches. So I put a lot of work in these paintings. This one took me 3 months to do, and I want to make sure I knew what I was doing. So I did all these preliminaries.
Yeah, I mean, you do such detail too that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like you can just whip them out.
No. And we went to Cheyenne. I got permission to photograph the shoots on the rodeo grounds. You had to get permission. I had pretty much exhausted the ones in Cody. I photographed a lot of bronc riders and bull riders in the Cody arena. So I got permission to go to Cheyenne. It was during Frontier Days, and they had a parade. And the parade had backed up downtown, I think in front of on the main street. And Timberjack Joe was always in just about every parade, and who I'd photographed, at Crow Fair, and I knew him, and he was in the parade, and it was just a graph shot with his fox. And he lived in Gillette, and in Bear Hole 621. That was his address.
Really?
Yeah, he's hanging in the museum.
He had a skunk with him instead of a fox, like in that
Yeah.
image. Yeah, and there I guess there's actually is the painting.
And I never realized how big my paintings were, until I see them on the wall. Of course, they put a frame on them, but it's a nice painting. I painted them quite a few times.
So you have a number of paintings with Timberjack Joe in them?
I have 3. I was just going through my prints. I have 3 paintings. I photographed him at Crow Fair in 1970, and I have another one where he came and posed for me, and then this one was in Cheyenne. 3 prints and 3 paintings. Very photogenic guy.
Let me kind of. And this is one of the smaller, just to get color, is what
Exactly.
way you would do
Color
that.
sketch, yeah. I finally had so many photographs I took this small, I didn't have time to do the larger.
How long would it take you to do something like that?
Oh, a day, a few hours maybe.
And you'd be looking at just like this photograph.
Exactly.
You made that.
Exactly.
And then when you were actually making the painting, would you use kind of both of them to kind of.
Yeah, exactly. You should have been honest.
I'm better to ask you questions and maybe than doing the painting.
But the challenge is to design everything. I would design every little shape, every little shape. I was trained to do that, and had years of experience as an illustrator. And everything works in my paintings. If it doesn't work, I don't do the painting. But I jiggle and juggle a lot of things to get it to compose.
And a lot of people just think these are actually photographs themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Your paintings.
Yeah, they do, but they're not.
No, they kind of look like a photograph. There's some details. I mean, even the beadwork there. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just,
I love to do stuff like that.
and just the whiskers on the
Yeah,
fox.
yeah, I love to do stuff.
So you had that pet fox you'd keep around. Obviously, he had this as a pet. This
Oh,
fox.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So they had a number of like
He
foxes
had a
and
dog, he had a
skunk.
skunk. Yeah.
Oh, that's a
He was quite a
amazing painting.
Quite a character. I was at Old Trail Town photographing some people, and these two cowboys were at the west end of Trail Town, and that's the North Fork looking up the river. And they were talking, and I just thought it made a good picture, so I photographed them. The lighting was nice.
That's kind of like the sculpture of the two cowboys shaking hands. I think.
Oh
it's
yeah,
out there.
famous sculpture, yeah, on the trail. Painting. I did a painting of Bob Edgar at Old Trail Town, and we did a special edition of 500, which he and I signed, and we raised $20,000 for Trail Town. And I met someone who told me I should do Bill Horncloud. He was the oldest living Indian on the reservation who was the ancestor of the survivors of Wounded Knee. He was 83. So I photographed them, and this is Fred Garlow, who was Buffalo Bill's grandson, who had a ranch, a guest ranch on the North Fork, and we became friends. And he went around portraying his grandfather to raise money for the museum. And he was a really nice guy, and so I arranged to photograph him. We were right here at the museum, in fact, when I took these pictures, and his wife said, "You were so anxious to photograph, when are you going to paint them?" Well, I did paint them several times, and he was just a nice man.
And that's Fred Garlow, which is Bill Garlow his brother? Or?
Yeah, I photographed them both.
Ah,
They were
okay.
brothers. This is one of the great stories of my life. I used to get the Billings paper, which I still do, and on the Sunday edition, on the front page, there's this picture of this old prospector in Yankee Jim Canyon. You know, what a great name, up above Gardner, Montana, outside the park. So I figured, well, I don't know how to get a hold of him. And I used to go for the mail at the Wapiti Post Office every day. And some woman came in. Her husband, believe it or not, was an illustrator in Gardner, Montana. I don't know how he made a living, but he did this comic book showing the history of Yellowstone Park. And she was trying to sell them to the guest lodges, and the Wapiti Post Office had guest cabins too. So I met her there, and she arranged to have me meet him. So I went up to Yankee Jim Canyon and photographed Earl McConnell. And I did a painting of him and put it in the Western Art Show in Chicago, and they used it on the cover of the brochure, and I sent it to him, and he went around showing it to everyone. All of a sudden, he was a hero. And, you know, I never saw him again. He told me he used to pan 80 pans of gold a day with this Rube Goldberg contraption. He had it down by the river. I don't know if he was telling me the truth or not. It doesn't look like he could pan gold.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that contraption
No,
is.
but anyway, that was another great experience. And here he is again. You never know where they'll wind up. But a great looking old guy, as you can see. And oddly enough, Yankee Jim, who owned the property up there years ago, and the only way the railroad or wagons or riders could come through was to pay a toll for them. Then they put a railroad in and put him out of business. And every time the trains would come by, you know, curse at him, and shake his fist, and he looks just like this guy, a white beard.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's the story. And this is Slim Wright.
You know, when I first worked for the Forest Service,
You
Slim
worked
was
for him, yeah.
Slim was still working.
Was he big?
Yeah.
Big guy. Yeah, we met him when we lived on the South Fork. He was herding some cows on the trail. And so he got up to pose for me. But he was the Forest Ranger of the Year that year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He was head of trails on the Wapiti district when I was working up at Sunlight in the mid-'70s.
He was really a big guy.
Yeah. I mean, he was. Well, what year was that? It was 74. So that was a couple years before I knew him.
Oh, that's the one.
And that's the old Forest Service patch, which has changed
Huh.
a lot. I mean, where they don't. That's the old patch.
And we're pretty good friends.
I'd like to have that hat.
Oh, so would I. And this is Grandma Slack. Again, another great story. Terry Edgar, Bob Edgar's wife, you know, we were all good friends. We used to camp out together and go places together. And she told me I should go out to the Teetsy, to the Burlington Highway, to photograph Grandma Slack, who was a 95-year-old pioneer woman. In fact, she came out when she was 17 on a covered wagon with her husband, and they worked on the Trout Creek Ranch. And Marquette was above water when the last time she'd been up in North Fork,
Oh, really?
before they put the reservoir in. And so I went out and photographed her in the Teetsy, and she wanted to tie me up and keep me there. She's 95 years old. The best offer I ever got. And she and her daughter-in-law came up to visit us. And I took these pictures up on the North Fork. And she couldn't see very well, and there were boulders outside her house, and she thought they were buffalo. But she was a great little old lady.
Well, you can appreciate that nowadays, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
But
And here she is again. Terry told me to bring her some caramels, because she loved to eat caramel. And she
she
started.
had good teeth, and it got good enough teeth to eat caramels, huh?
95, and she started chewing. She wouldn't stop, so I told her she had to stop so I could take her picture. But she was a great looking old lady, and she could get around okay. And she lived her whole life with a hand pump and a stove. She never had utilities.
But you know, my grandparents never had indoor plumbing or electricity until
Yeah.
after World War II.
Well, she was a real pioneer woman. Oh, and this is great too. I used to go to all the shearings, all the ranches, and Jim Ivory, who used to be the contractor for the night rodeo, was a friend of mine because I used to hang around there a lot. And his son and my son were the same age in school. And at this point, after he sold the rodeo, his job was working for the county, setting up and repairing signs, like signs at Dunn Creek Road. So I saw him down at the road when I went for the mail, and he said he was going to a shearing at the Grabbert Ranch in Emblem. It was from 1895. That's when the ranch was founded. So it was in January. Most of the brandings were in the spring. But this one was in the winter, and it was inside in a dark barn. And it was too dark to photograph. So I wandered around the ranch. And here's this old guy with this white beard. He had been a sheep herder. I think he was a big drinker. And they let him live in one of the sheep wagons. And so he's just there, completely available. You never know where the paintings will wind up. But a great looking old guy. Great looking old guy. He wouldn't let me pay him because
He wouldn't let you pay him.
no. Neither would Earl McConnell, the old guy up in Yankee Hill Canyon. A lot of these guys were proud.
And then some of them aren't too bothered by getting paid multiple times.
Right. This is Smoky Blue McClure. Someone told me there was a camper and a pickup truck parked on the rodeo grounds. This is in the winter, I think. It wasn't during rodeo season. And he was there with his kids. So I went down and found him, and he came up and posed for me. Great looking guy. And I paid him $400. And he was, but anyway, that's Smoky Blue McClure. And this is Rex Ryan.
Rusty Ryan?
Rusty Ryan. He was a Hollywood actor, really good-looking man, big, strong hands. He'd been a cowboy most of his life, and now he made a living performing at rodeos. He had this holster with a piece of newspaper in it, and he would hit him with his whip, from a distance, and that's what he did. But that's Rusty Ryan. And he was a Hollywood Western movie actor. really rugged looking guy.
And he would just come here for the rodeo to perform.
I don't know what he was doing here. I don't think he was in the rodeo, but he was up here. I don't know what he was doing here. Someone told me about it. So I went down and met him. And this is Brett McKinley, Scott McKinley's son at the Two Dot Ranch. He tried to look just like his father. He was about 6'3", and he wound up being a big, tall kid. And I don't know whatever happened to him. Oh, yeah. And this is Mary Blackhorse. When I went up to Reindeer to photograph all those Native Americans, she was one of them. And I did a beautiful painting of her and had a big show in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they used her on the cover of the catalog. Mary Blackhorse. Great names.
Yeah.
And this, another interesting story, this is Cerise Stewart. Cerise Stewart. Her husband was a Crow medicine man for the Whistlewater clan. And Bob Edgar arranged for him to pose for me. They came down about 3 times. I think I paid him $500 each time. And her grandmother was a famous Crow medicine woman, Pretty Shield. Bison Press put out a book on her grandmother. She was that prominent. And she had all her grandmother's medicine bundles and everything. And so I photographed her 3 times. Never painted her. I did paint her once.
You did paint her?
Yeah. And Lynn went out photographing, and she went into Oregon Basin, and she saw the sheep wagon. Bob Edgar always used to tell me about old sheep herders with white beards. So in rushing out there in the winter, thinking I'd find an old sheep herder, and there was a young college kid who was doing it, you know, on Christmas vacation. And we became good friends. So anyway, I went out there several times and photographed him, and also a whole bunch of sheep herders in the Burlington area on the Sleeper Ranch, owned by the Hunts. Anyway, this is one of the sheep wagons. Very colorful.
Did you ever do any paintings with sheep wagons in them?
Oh yeah, I did one. A young sheep herder.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And this is Clayton Small. I saw his picture in the Billings paper. He was up in Cheyenne on the Reindeer Reservation. Hollywood handsome, thoroughly sophisticated. He was the head of the 7 organization in Billings. It was an intertribal organization that represented 7 tribes. And so I tracked him down and had him come down and pose for me. He was married to a white woman. So he dressed up in his powwow clothes. And I believe I did a painting of him. Clayton Small.
And had his face painted, obviously, there.
Yeah. Very nice guy. And here he is again, posing for me in his western. You can see it's very good looking. Clayton Small. And this is a cabin on the North Fork. Great old cabin. I photographed it in the snow. And one of Albert Sauerwein's sons had a birthday party, and they had it inside this. But it's a beautiful old cabin.
Oh, yeah. Looks like an old barn, kind of almost.
Yeah, it was an old barn. And this is just a kid